Nyankinyamena, Namani, Maninaburni, Nyalukuyata, Tandaganya, Garniata, Nyanyari Robert Kari Karamil Taylor, Nanyarindari Naranga, Kumaganamena, Maninyalu Tampati Ganamena, Kumandalu Pana Yatanga, Imbrendi, Tamdalo Bukiana, Burkana, Kumaganamena Yadra, Nayakandalia, Yungandalia, Nachalia. Greetings, my name is Robert Taylor. I come from 3 different Aboriginal groups, the Ngarrindjeri from the Coorong, the Naranga from the Yorke Peninsula, and the Kaurna people from this place here, Adelaide. And on behalf of my elders and ancestors, past and present, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today onto Kaurna land and acknowledge that this is the traditional land of the Kaurna people. I also pay my respects to all First Nations people of Australia for their struggle with the stolen generation. And I'd like to acknowledge the youth that have also struggled in finding their identity, and we hope that one day they'll be reunited with their families. Bugiana!
My mother, Hilda Jarman Muir, was taken from her Aboriginal community of Borroloola to a place called Karrpanthi Compound, where for many years she was to be civilised, colonised and Christianised. Ani Sissy Cabello. You and me.
I don't think there was a time that we were able to relax in bringing justice for the stolen generations people, and also the attempts that we made for compensations for those stolen generations people, which we are still fighting for, because many stolen generations have got nothing for the fact that they were removed and separated from their families and communities. We are still fighting for those people to get recognised and get justice. Uncle Brian Butler.
In a tempered conversation.
I not see you long time now. I not see you long time now. Why fella been take me from you? I don't know why. Give me to missionary to be God's child. Give me new language. Give me new name. All time I cry. They say, that's shame. I go to the city, down south, real cold. I forget all them stories. My mother, you told. Gone is the spirit, my dreaming, my name, gone to these people, our country to claim. They gave me white mother. She give me new name. All time I cry. She say that shame. I not see you long time now. I not see you long time now. Annie Eva Johnson.
The child grew up and had to go from a mission home that he loved so. To find his mother, he tried in vain, but upon this earth, they never met again. The late Uncle Bobby Randall.
To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry.
They say sorry. They say sorry.
Truth-telling is a really important part of the reconciliation agenda. That is why every year we like to commemorate the 2008 Apology to the Stolen Generations. It is a really important part of our shared history as a nation. It's been 25 years since the tabling of the Bringing Them Home report and the national inquiry into the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. I had the privilege and the honour to talk with Professor Marianne Binsalek and Professor Michael Lavarch about their role in the inquiry, the footprint it's left on their life, and the unfinished business that remains today.
Well, I was the South Australian Co-Commissioner for the Bringing Them Home inquiry, and the significance to me was amazing because people came. You know, I had been living in South Australia for some 20 years, so I knew a lot of people. Some of them were my friends and some were students that had graduated. And so I gave them permission to speak to someone else, but they didn't mind. People were just so anxious to get their story out. It had been pent up for years, and some of them had never talked about it. And it was very interesting because the inquiry group had been up to other places before it came to South Australia. And when it came to South Australia, now Professor Dodson said to us, you know, look, we've been here, there, and at the end when we debrief, everybody cries, you know. And I looked at him and I was astonished, but that's what happened. We cried with some of the people telling their stories, but at the debrief, we sobbed. We sobbed. You know, you can't, you know, I get emotional thinking about it, but it's hard to imagine what some of those people had gone through, you know, and at an early age and at an older age, and just the trauma that they had. And they were just so pleased to get their story out, just to have someone listen to them. And so it really left its mark on me in that I understood my grandmother and my other relatives, and because my grandmother died when my mother was 12, and so she went into the convent and went to school from there and worked from there. So, you know, I understand why that I had this institutional upbringing, you know, just listening to what people were saying. So it really did leave a mark. It's on something that I feel very grateful and honoured to have been asked by the South Australian people, considering I don't come from there, but I had been there for a long time. And it's very dear to me. The Bringing Them Home report was very dear to me, to actually see the pages of the stories, you know, knowing that it was what was collected.
Well, look, I think that the principal significance of the Bringing Them Home report and the whole inquiry process is that it chipped significantly at a big part of the great Australian silence, if you like, and this was this really broad ignorance of the nation's own history by non-Indigenous Australians. Obviously, Aboriginal and Islander Australians, very much understood, lived with, were still experiencing the removal of children. But as part of the colonial project, if you like, arguably the most destructive thing that occurred to the First Nation peoples of Australia was the forced removal of children from their homes. And if you combine that with the forced loss of language, the systematic attempt to assimilate First Nations into Western European, British culture, this practice of child removal was so devastating, and yet it was unacknowledged in the broader community. And while the Bringing Them Home report and the inquiry process didn't do this alone, obviously there were other big trends occurring in this period, in leading up to the mid 1990s. It was a part of that lifting of the veil of the national eyes on this tragedy. So obviously the rabbit-proof fence and that movie and in terms of some sort of impact on popular culture was around the same sort of time, but we got the stories told. And as Marianne was just saying, the ability of First Nations to actually speak themselves, the real power of the report isn't in its statistics and its recording of what happened through official documents and the like, as powerful as that is, but the real punch you in the face is the personal testimony of those who were removed, of those families, and getting the sense of that impact.
We have from a long time, and we still are saying Australia has a Black history. And this was a part of that Black history that really amazed non-Indigenous people around the country. So it was a big impact. And you have to admire the bravery of the people that told their stories. And it's really sad that some of the 9 recommendations that haven't been attended to, it's about the structure. It's about the structure of the storytelling and the repositories, So it's still very much unfinished business. It's really a traumatic part of most of our lives.
Well, the role I suppose I played in it, I was the Attorney General in the Keating government, and I, on behalf of the government, commissioned the Human Rights Commission to undertake the inquiry. Sir Ron Wilson, who was president of the commission at that stage, and Mick Dodson, who was the Social Justice Commissioner, were the prime drivers within the commission in terms of getting the inquiry underway. And in terms of where I sat at that stage, obviously, if you think back to that period of the Keating government, after Paul Keating was re-elected in 1993, there was some really land piece bits of work going on in terms of Indigenous Australia. Obviously, there was the response to the Mabo decision, the establishment of the whole native title regime. There was the establishment of the Indigenous Land Corporation. There was a work underway on the social justice package, which didn't see the light of day, in as much as the election and the government changed. And then this work in terms of commissioning the Human Rights Commission to do the Bringing Them Home inquiry. So it was part of a big sort of agenda at that time, where there was a lot of national focus, not for the first time, obviously, but probably in some ways a period of intense national focus and national governmental leadership, if you like, in terms of Australia's coming to terms with the position of its First Nations people. In terms of what that then sort of did for me at a personal level, it certainly, this whole issue has remained with me in the 25 years that have followed. In my professional life, I've continued to work a lot in Indigenous affairs, with Indigenous peoples, professionally as a lawyer, doing native title works as a legal academic. More recently, with my wife, Professor Larissa Berendt, we did just a couple of years ago a major documentary called After the Apology, which looked at what had happened since the national apology, which in 2008, which no doubt we'll talk about, and followed a powerful group called Grandmothers Against Removal, who were engaging in terms of various child welfare agencies and the continued removal of children from their families. So it's an issue which has remained very much with me over the 25 years since the report was commissioned.
Well, I had big hopes because it was the Keating era, I had big hopes with the report because he had already did the Redfern speech, and so, and also that the people that told their stories to us, they had big hopes, big hopes in terms of, because a lot of them were familiar with the recommendations afterwards, and I have seen them since. And they keep asking, when's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? And in some ways, it's similar to them waiting for their children who are forcibly removed to come home. This report, they're waiting for it to deliver things that should have been done. Like now, the ATSIC was supposed to be responsible for something, but ATSIC's no longer there. So things don't happen. And I think the taking away of ATSIC, helped them to forget whoever forgot or whoever lagged at doing something important. Because, we had a wonderful march across the Sydney Bridge. There were 250,000 people. At least, and so people were fired up and we were fired up and we're still waiting. And one of the things that in the recommendations that hasn't been looked at is that, we're supposed to be teaching Aboriginal studies or the history of the removal and some of the history. We're always on about Australia has a black history and we tried to promote it in different ways. And we thought this was going to be a time because of the rollout of people that came and the First Nations people that came from around the country, we all got on planes and went there and walked there and to see the people that were there, was wonderful. It made our hearts sing. But then after that, poor Keating left, and there's never been anyone like him again. You had that ear that could be honest and wasn't afraid of saying what he thought.
In terms of what the hopes were at the time of the tabling, I mean, as we've noted, There was a federal election during the holding of the inquiry, and the government changed, and the Howard government was elected in 1996. So it was a little bit later, 18 months or so after the change of government, that the report was delivered, and the government responded to it. And at the time, unfortunately, in a way, the debate got a bit hijacked by the sorry question. That is, was John Howard going to pick up the recommendation about an apology and saying sorry to those impacted by the stolen generations? And as we all know, he took a world view which was against that, and unfortunately that sort of influenced the whole response at that time, the government's response. It was a very low-key thing. It was simply a speech by the then Aboriginal Affairs Minister John Heron to the Senate. There was really no fanfare around it. And there was a bit of sort of culture wars argument about, could you rely on the statistics, and, what was the sterile debate as to, was it 1 in 10 kids that were removed? Was it a lesser number, which, missed the point in many ways. And the core of the recommendations, of course, which went, look, to the past to some extent, but were fundamentally about the present, and what the policies were at that time, and what the policy settings were about child removal. And really the core of it, and it's a repetitive debate, but at the core of it was about self-determination and allowing First Nations people to have proper agency and power and control to look after their kids, to be supported to do so, to have a system and engagement with government agencies which enabled respectful, proper relationships going forward. And that got lost a bit around should the Prime Minister or should the Parliament apologise or not. And we didn't pick these things up again until a little bit later on. The recommendations, and again, it's a sad story, but it's a little bit like a repeat of the Royal Commission into deaths in custody, where a whole, flavour and spirit of recommendations have not been implemented. And the same can be said about the Bringing Them Home report. I mean, a range of them have been, some have been picked up in part, and we're still getting dribs and drabs. Like, we more recently got some movement on the issue of compensation, for instance, which was very much a no-no at the time of the government's response to the report, and wasn't picked up, one has to say, by the Rudd government at the time of the apology. To be fair about these things, hasn't just been Liberal governments being bad or Labor governments being good. I mean, there's been disappointments around, across the board, if you like, and some advances across the board. One of the risks, I suppose, in this sort of work, for the non-Indigenous community, the handing over the report, and then particularly the national apology, can be sort of viewed, okay, that was terrible, that was in the past, that's behind us, it's important that be acknowledged, life moves on. The reality, of course, is very different from that. What we've seen is that the rate of Aboriginal and Islander child removal has exponentially increased since the time of the tabling of the Bringing Them Home report. It increased then in the period to the national apology in 2008. And from 2008 onwards, it has effectively doubled again. So there are far more kids being taken through interventions of state child welfare agencies today than there was at the time of the national apology. So the rates are increasing. The last year or two, maybe there's some indication of stabilisation. Now, as I say, I think there are some reasons for positivity, particularly with the recasting of the closing the gap priorities and the reporting, because ironically, when the apology was given, Kevin Rudd also announced the closing the gap strategy, and we had our targets. One of the targets was not about child removal. That was not a closing the gap target. You know, life expectancy, employment rates, education outcome, you know, vital things. But the thing that actually drove the apology, the forced removal of children, was not a target in the closing the gap. Now, that has been redressed only in the last sort of year or so with the recasting of the closing the gap strategy, and now we have a specific target about removal of children. So it is such a complicated space that the important message for non-Indigenous Australians, and I get sort of shock every time I talk to people about this, this is not the past. This isn't something of the 1930s or the like, you know, the less enlightened time. This is Australia today.
Well, where we are today I'm very disappointed with the implementation, but where I am in terms of the stolen people, you know, and it's 25 years since the report, well, there is another group of stolen people. And now, with the children of today and going down as young as 10, that's a third layer. So it's not going away. It's a heartache. It is a heartache for those families. And, you know, one of the things that has been overlooked is that, you know, people say, well, it's their parents, but those parents are the parents who have had trauma and post-traumatic stress. Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting the way they do, you know, and they are dulling their pain with all sorts of things. So it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle, and it's really heartbreaking. I try not to dwell on it too much, you know, but being a great grandmother, I've got to think about it. It's sad. And you look at these kids, you know, you meet them when they were born, and then, you know, when they're in primary school, they're in detention, you know, and you can't always blame the parents because they went through the trauma as well, or they were children of people who were traumatic, the first generation. And if you have a look at the housing situation and the unemployment situation, you know, that all exacerbates the position, and it's the poor little ones that suffer. And then they end up, you know, being so despised by society.
A lot of people do remember, because it was such a significant day. And I mean, I was at work. I was at this point dean of the law faculty at the QUT up in Brisbane. So it was a work day, but I was able to watch it on television. And, you know, given my background in the commissioning of the report and the like. And it was an enormously emotional day, and it was a very cathartic day. And I think, you know, I was very proud, and, you know, the images of not in the parliament so much, but of the crowds outside the parliament. And when you see, old guys crying and the like, you had to be really touched by it.
Professor Vinsalik, do you remember?
Yes, I certainly do. I'll never forget. I was here. I was the Dean of Indigenous Education at that time. And so we put on in a different building, exactly where we are now, but we put on a barbecue. So because of daylight saving, we had to come very early. So we put on a barbecue for all the Indigenous staff and students, and a lot of our non-Indigenous staff and students who wanted to come. And then we listened to it, and, I cried. I cried for my grandmother, and I cried for my mother and my aunts and the people that were very closely related to me, and my cousins who were stuck in that orphanage. That wasn't an orphanage. So it was cathartic, but it was good to get it out. It was good to cry about it and then move on. But it's a time that I will never forget, and we were all there together. And so it wasn't as if, we're sitting there in isolation, one person at a time, but there was a lot of support, and we were just glued to Kevin Rudd. And he made our day, he made our year. It was just wonderful to hear. And, it was just a shame that a lot of people were already gone and they didn't get to hear it. But we did, and we remembered.
I think really, while there's a whole range of recommendations and some, implemented to some extent and some implemented in name, but maybe not fully, in spirit, if you'd like, some not touched on as the like. But if I was going to say what is the sort of the underlying sort of, weakness that remains and which continues to be not the only factor, but an important factor why we still have such high levels of First Nations children interacting with the child welfare system and being subject to various control orders or out of care arrangements and the like. It is the issue of empowerment, self-determination, if you like. And you see that these themes are never new, and wherever you look, you find another manifestation of them. So, the Uluru themes of voice, treaty, truth, really you can run the same lens over the Bringing Them Home report. It's about empowerment, being heard, having an ability to control and have a genuine say and partnership in how government and decisions are made across the board, but obviously in this debate about how children are protected, about equipping people to be able to have those proper agency to engage. So it is that's the unfinished business for Australia to have a system where First Nations peoples are properly equipped through the structures of the system of government, of our constitutional arrangements, various dimensions of it, to be able to properly exercise full and proper engagement in the life of their own land, their own continent, and we've not achieved that. That is still there, and that's why Uluru is the latest manifestation of it. But you can trace this back, to the claims of William Cooper and the Day of Mourning. We just had Australia debate and that debate again, but it's always the same issue because Australia hasn't confronted it.
Well, I have to agree with Professor Labarge, but for me, I see the raw side of that inhumane behaviour, because I live in Darwin and, people are walking around drugged up, grogged up, hard coherent, children as young as 4 sniffing those aerosol things. Now you can't buy them in the shop here, they're behind, they're locked up. And it's just putting up with that, and having people being insulting. I mean, I walked to my local supermarket and it was near the library, this is in my street, and there was a young girl, she must be about 16, she was beautifully dressed. She was from one of the remote communities and she asked me for some money and I said, look, I've only got a card. And as I said this non-Indigenous man walked past and he said, get a bloody job. And he was talking to her, but I stepped in and I said, I have a job, thank you. And he said, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to them. And I said, well, I am a part of them. And he just went left quickly. But you get this all the time, and these people are just out of their minds because the pain is so bad, the trauma is so bad, and you see the little kids being dragged. They're at every suburb in Darwin, even Fanny Bay, all the nice suburbs wherever the rich people live. They've got, there are people living in the long grass and are lost. And, you look at them and you think, well, they could have, if they had the chance, they could have succeeded like a lot of us have. But they never had the chance. And you hear the comments from people all the time, and it's just a vicious cycle. And it's just so painful because it's real raw. And that it's not their fault. And even if they wanted to do something about it, there's no agency for them here. There would have been with these recommendations, but they've just gone by the wayside. It is really sad. But, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful. I think we've still got to keep going, still try and do your little bit as much as you can.
For non-Indigenous Australians, I think the important thing is to understand that we're just not talking about some dusty thing of the past. We are really talking about life experiences today in terms of how the child protection structures work in Australia or don't work. So it's very current, and it's something to be engaged with. There are ways forward and get in behind those campaigns, such as the Uluru processes, to ask that states do pick up the cudgels on treaty processes. Unfortunately, South Australia started and then has stopped in terms of investigating a treaty, but we've got Queensland and Victoria, now Tasmania, the ACT, all down the road now to some extent on treaty processes. We hopefully will see the Commonwealth government a little bit more engaged in terms of the constitutional recognition issue and how that can also play out. And the pleasing thing of the last 12 months or so, I think, has been the partnership model through the community controlled sector, the reshaping of the closing the gap strategy and how that's going to be progressed, and the highlighting now, as I said, at least now we have direct visibility as one of the closing the gap targets, the target to bring back into line with the overall community experience the removal of children, so that the life experiences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous families over time become the same. So that's an important development. So like all these things, are always sort of a bit of mixed sort of messages to the extent things are to some extent a bit sobering, But there is always good work going on, and if we can get in behind our Aboriginal and Islander community organisations, empower them, get government to really engage and have a partnership model, not token sort of consultation, but genuine partnership, then we can make gains. And, you know, and there are many good news stories of successful communities who do thrive when equipped and empowered to be able to do so.
I think we can't give up. We've got to keep moving forward. We've got to take, and we've got to salvage whatever we can. I think that has got to get better. More of our people are getting educated and are working back with First Nations organisations and that. So I'm always hopeful, but I'm also mindful that we have to grab any bit of salvage that we can. And I think that those of us who are now living and working and contributing to the community, we must never forget that out there are our people who haven't even got food on their table, haven't even got a roof over their head.
It truly was an honour for me to be a part of that conversation, and I hope it's provided you with some insights into the Bring 'em Home report and the work of the Commissioners and the Attorney-General at the time. My hope is that you can take this conversation beyond today. There is much unfinished business as a result of this report. Please take the time to read it. Please take the time to talk about it. And please take the time to think about your role as we go forward as a community together.
Ruby made the music come to life for the love of a woman, give a man reason to write. When a woman gives her love, it's a gift that lifts a broken man up. Ruby used to strum on her guitar, searching for a melody, words that would explain away the past. Has known pain, she loves deeper than almost anything. She asks nothing of herself. Shall I play the tainted card she's dealt? She has weathered many storms, the dark and through the cold. Ruby's heart was always warm. beside him on the stage, sharing what becomes of love when there's music and a big wide world to change. When a woman sings her song, tells her story, it makes every woman strong.